While we're waiting for everybody to join in, we'll ask those of you who are in attendance to write in the chat box, which is in the bottom of your screen, where you're tuning in from. You can do that during the presentation. You don't all have to rush in and do it now. And I would also ask you to turn off your microphones. That's the mute button down in the bottom left, down here. And to turn off your video as well, because otherwise, if you make a noise during the presentation, your image will flash up on the screen, and you probably don't want that to happen, okay? There will be questions at the end. You can write your questions in the chat box as well as the presentation's ongoing, or you can wait till the end and we ask you to turn on your microphones and cameras again at that stage so you can put your question in person. Before we introduce our speaker, Martina O'Neill's our speaker tonight. Before we introduce Martina, I'm going to introduce Elmarie Swanepoel, who is the program manager for the Lough Erne Landscape program, or partnership, sorry. So Elmarie is going to give you a little bit of a background to LELP, as we call it, what we do and what our objectives are, okay? So I'll hand you over to Elmarie.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. Good evening, everybody. So my name is Elmarie Swanepoel, as Richard said. I'm the program manager here for the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership. So at the start of all of our events, I would normally do a very short introduction to the Landscape Partnership, but I'm aware also that several attendees tonight would have listened to my introduction before. So I promise to keep it very short. We do have a really good website, so there is lots of information on there. So Heather would be putting the address for you in the chat bar. So feel free at the end of the event to go through our website, and that will give you more detail on all of the projects that we're doing. So basically, the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership is a large heritage program. It's focused around the shores and communities here of Upper and Lower Lough Erne in Vermonter. We have 7 formal partners involved in our partnership, with RSPB as the lead organisation. Other partners, of course, also includes the Vermonter and Omagh District Council, Waterways Ireland, National Trust, Upper Lough Erne Region, Vermonter Rural Community Network, and also Lough Erne Heritage. We're now 2.5 years into delivery of our £3.3 million scheme of projects. We're currently delivering 23 projects, and we're scheduled at the minute to complete the scheme in March 2023. So all of our work really focus on the delivery of projects in the areas of natural, built, and cultural heritage. The themes for all of our work includes creating access to some of our local heritage assets, undertaking conservation work of priority landscapes and species, engaging with our local community with their heritage, and of course that's why we're here this evening, and also trying to find creative ways to engage people and to share the very unique stories of this area, which of course is very, very rich in both heritage features, but also cultural aspects. So one of the key focuses of the partnership throughout the life of our program is to act as a coordinating body. And what I mean by that is that we are aiming to ensure that we can build through the life of the program some appropriate networks to form really strong relationships so that we can work together to deliver successful landscape scale management of this area. So with that in mind, we of course work very closely with various organizations to highlight and to celebrate some of the unique landscapes. And of course, we're very lucky tonight to be exploring one of those, which would be as part of the Marble Arch Caves UNESCO Global Geopark, which forms part of the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership footprint. So on that note, I will hand over to Martina, who's the expert in the field, and she's very best placed really to share her knowledge around this very special landscape within our footprint. Later on this evening, after we've had an opportunity to provide some questions to Martina, I will give you a bit more information about some of our future events coming up. But from me, Richard, I think that's where I would leave it for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, Anne-Marie, thank you very much. So our guest speaker for tonight is Martina O'Neill, and Martina is talking about the hidden worlds of the Lough Erne landscape. Landscapes are unique places which have been shaped by many influences over time, and none more so than the unique landscapes of Lough Erne. Tonight, Martina O'Neill will take us on an exploration of the many layers of the hidden Lough Erne landscape and unleash the amazing and unique stories they have to tell. So as I say, Martina O'Neill's our speaker. I've known Martina for many, many years, and I'm really looking forward to this tonight. I think it'd be brilliant. Anyway, but I'll go through the formal bit. Martina first joined the Marble Arch Caves UNESCO Global Geopark in 2009, and she has occupied many roles over the years, all with a strong focus on international, national, and locally funded projects. Her current role is Development Officer, Partnership and Engagement in the newly formed cross-border Global Geopark team, where she has overall responsibility for wider stakeholder and community engagement, education and activity programs, research and volunteering programs across the Global Geopark area in West Fermanagh and West Cavan. And in 2019, she was accepted as an evaluator on the UNESCO Global Geoparks evaluation team. Martina is very passionate about all facets of our heritage and is very fortunate to be able to live, work and play in the spectacular landscapes of the Marble Arch Caves UNESCO Global Geopark. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Martina. Martina, you have the floor.
It's great. Thank you very much, Richard. I know I didn't realise you were going to read out the biography. So yeah, rhyme and verse there, folks. What I'm going to do is, first and foremostly, I will share my screen with you all here. So just bear with me 1 second. Can everybody just see the screen okay there? I'm just checking. Heather, just wondering.
I'm getting the symbols around it as well, I think.
Okay, the symbol. Okay, that's perfect. We just retry it again. Apologies. Let me just turn it up first. Nice. 1 second. It looks like it's decided to freeze on me there. So let's see.
Richard, I think that's your cue to give us a little sing-song.
Yes, sure.
We're all right. Hopefully.
The 16 participants will soon diminish, I tell you, if I start singing. But anyway, this is the joys of online presentations, folks.
Absolutely.
So bear with us a wee while and we'll get it sorted.
Absolutely. Hold on just 1 second and it should hopefully. It just doesn't look like it's looking to try and do what we've done before.
It's all right. Okay, you keep working away. We'll improvise in the meantime.
Okay. Well, sure. If we have to, we will.
Yeah.
We go with the way it was, but
yeah. So as long as you get the picture up, it doesn't matter whether it's full screen or not.
Yeah, exactly. Although it would be better. You can go with the apologies, folks. So we're all very keen to make a start, and it just keeps wanting to present in a different view. And we had it mastered before, but
I know literally 10 minutes before it was absolutely working 100%.
Absolutely working 100%. Maybe if
yeah,
I try.
That's the joys.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what if I try? Here we go. Here we go. What about that, folks?
Perfect.
100%, Martina, thank you.
Let's hope that works now. It does indeed. All right, so apologies for that, folks, as Richard and the colleagues from the lab team there, the joys of working now in this new virtual world of ours. So hopefully I'll make up for that as we make our way through the presentation. So first and foremostly, I want to thank Anne-Marie, Heather, Hazel and Richard there for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. Delighted to be here and delighted that so many have taken time to come and listen to me tonight. I'll give you a wee quick run through in terms of what we're going to look at. And as I say, hopefully intended to keep you no longer than 45 minutes, I suppose, folks, just to leave plenty of time there for anyone who has any questions that you may want to ask. And I will try and keep this very informal as well as we go. I know it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time in many ways for us all at the moment. And what we'd all like to do this evening, I hope first and foremostly, is have a bit of fun, a little bit of escapism. If we can learn something along the way, and certainly if you're like me, listening to plenty of online talks in the evening time, to get that inspiration and that motivation back, and learn, as we say, a little bit more about the fantastic landscapes we have here in Fermanagh, and indeed in particular in the Lough and Geopark area as well. So I'll do a brief introduction at the start, obviously then outlining just what the Marble Arch Caves UNESCO Global Geopark actually is, where we come from, who and what and where we are. And then we'll get into the main body of the talk proper. So looking at this specific detail of how we unlock some of the stories of the fascinating landscapes around the Geopark and indeed Lough Erne. And then, as I say, plenty of time, I suppose, for questions there at the end as well. So why me? I suppose to start off with, first and foremostly, to deliver the talk well. I didn't realise at the outset that Richard there was going to read the biography to start off with. So what I will caveat that with is I'm absolutely a self-proclaimed non-expert in everything. I think I'm what my mother would describe certainly as a jack of all trades and a master really of none. But what I have been very fortunate to do over the years are work with many experts in many different fields and learn significantly from them. As well as that, I live, work and have the pleasure of playing here in Fermanagh and in particular in this fascinating area of the Geopark. And as I mentioned there, my specific role in the Geopark, and I'm employed, and we'll go into this in a wee bit of detail, by Fermanagh and Omagh District Council as the Development Officer for Partnerships and Engagement, which is a very fancy title. It basically simply means that I am responsible for all facets of stakeholder engagement, of community engagement, of education and learning, research and volunteering in there too. So hopefully you'll enjoy this evening's talk. So we couldn't start. Hello.
Martina, can I interrupt?
You can,
I do
indeed.
apologise. The sound is terrible. It's very echoey.
Apologies.
I think it is, and I think it's the same for everyone. I'm not sure. It's very hard to hear. Could you maybe move the microphone further away from you, or maybe closer to you? Okay.
I will try, absolutely. Apologies for that.
It certainly isn't the same for everybody. We're hearing you absolutely perfectly.
Okay.
And we're hearing perfectly clearly as well.
Yes, I hear fine.
Fine. Okay. Well, I've moved it slightly as far away now, hopefully as I can. And apologies if that. Hopefully that makes some difference in there, and apologies significantly if it doesn't. I'm very sorry about that in relation to it. But yeah, to start off with then, I suppose we couldn't go much further without looking at an introduction to UNESCO Global Geoparks and what they actually are. So UNESCO Global Geoparks are defined as single geographical areas where sites and landscapes of international geological significance are managed with a holistic concept of protection, of education and of sustainable development. Now, in order to be a UNESCO Global Geopark, there are 4 fundamental features that you must, I suppose, adhere to. The first is to have geological heritage of international significance. And we are very fortunate, as we'll see, in this part of the world to thankfully have plenty of geological heritage or rocks, essentially, that are of international significance. The second is in terms of management. You must have a management structure that is legally recognised, that's adequately resourced, that involves all your stakeholders, and that you have a management plan and a framework that you're operating to. Nothing that you wouldn't expect to see there. And in terms of networking, we're very fortunate to be part of a much larger local, national and international network. We'll talk a wee bit about that as well. So networking is actually an obligatory part of that network, and it's fantastic to have that opportunity to learn and share information and experiences as well. And visibility. It's important that geoparks are visible, not only to your stakeholders, but also and significantly to local people who live and work in the area. You've got to have cross-cutting themes with a strong focus on sustainable development and a bottom-up community-based approach. We are, since 2015, an official programme within UNESCO, same as our sister programmes of World Heritage Sites is probably the one most of us are familiar with, and the other being Man and Biosphere Reserves as well. But we are different from them in terms of geoparks being a status and not actually a designation in that respect. So here's a map, just to give you an indication of some of the existing geoparks that exist elsewhere in Europe. As you can see, we're celebrating 20 years of the network this year. And there are presently 75 geoparks, as you can see, in 26 countries in Europe. But presently, there are 161 actually global geoparks across 44 different countries worldwide. And it is a network that is growing as well. Okay. Apologies, appear to be missing some slides in there, but let me see. Sorry, folks, this is just, oh, apologies, these have kind of been muddled up the wrong way around. So, but yes, so explain in terms of the evolution, I suppose, of our geopark. And hopefully this is a place that you are all familiar with. And if it's not, then it is somewhere you certainly need to get on your to-do list. This is the Marble Arch Caves, and I will unbiasedly and unashamedly say one of the premier tourist attractions on the island of Ireland. Opened in 1985 and has welcomed over 1.1 million visitors to this fantastic underground world. And we will talk a little bit about this later on. But the Marble Arch Caves, alongside this adjoining area of land that's known as Culca Mountain, and this is an image taken from the summit of Culca Mountain. Most of you, if you haven't recognised it as that, you may be familiar with it in terms of the coining of the Stairway to Heaven or the Culca Boardwalk, which you can actually see there that traverses along the blanket bog to the summit of the mountain. A spectacular place and a spectacular landscape in its own right. But back in 2001, both the Marble Arch Caves and Culca Mountain Park were awarded European Geopark status. And I have to say that the chair here of the LELC board, Richard Watson, was very much instrumental in that particular process, and indeed in UNESCO Global Geoparks in general. In 2004, we were awarded Global Geopark status. In 2006, a cross-border working group was established. And in 2007, we actually underwent our first major expansion into public lands in West Fermanagh. And that was closely followed by an expansion in 2008 into public lands in West Cavan as well. And in doing so, at that point in time, we became the first cross-border geopark anywhere in the world. In 2014, the flagship geopark site in Cavan, Cavan Park, actually opened to the public, and that's an image of that location there as well, just if any of you aren't familiar with that. And in 2015, as we mentioned, we were awarded UNESCO Global Geopark status, becoming an official sister programme along with the other two in UNESCO. And so since that point in time, then we've been undergoing a governance and management review as well. So just to give you an idea as to where we actually are, hopefully you can make this out okay, but the map on your left actually shows the hatched area, shows at the moment what is still the present boundary of our geopark. It has undergone some review over the past number of months, but that's where we are still at the moment. And in the map on the right then, anything really if you can make out in terms of a red dot or a green area of land, those are sites within the Marble Arch Caves Unesco Global Geopark. So we're looking at a huge tranche of land that basically stretches from Castle Caldwell and Tullyturry Forest on the northern shores of Lough Erne, right the way down this tract of land, this Forest Service land, in just to the west of the county, taking you through sort of Belcoo, Black Lane into the Culca Mountain area, and then once again down the west of County Cavan, right the way to the northern shores of Lough Erne there as well. I suppose just looking at where we are now, just to give you that overview. So we can see we've undergone the review. We are managed there jointly by Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and Cavan County Council, and we've had a significant restructuring exercise as a result of that review, meaning that each of us operate on a cross-border basis, and we're hoping that that will lead to a more integrated approach to development moving forward. The diagram on the right just gives you an indication of the team, and you can see where we sit, and there are 3 officers working to a manager, and each of us just aligned to loosely one of the principles of sustainability. In addition to that, we have a cohort of ambassadors and our new heritage champions, as well as volunteers, and obviously work with a number of statutory and voluntary agencies in terms of our engagement. And like most, we operate a significant number of funded projects and get most of our core internal funding from both Fermanagh and Omagh and Cavan County Council as well. This is our mission, our new mission. We have 2, just in case if one wasn't enough. So to nurture and protect our place, to ensure it provides a solid social, environmental and economic platform for our communities and enables them to live in balance. And to nurture and protect our special heritage so that our place can restore and revitalise those that live and visit here and can enable connections between people, heritage and nature. Okay. And these are going to be our key focus areas moving forward, with sustainability and partnership really at the core of what we do. Okay, so I think enough about Unesco Global Geoparks and enough about where we are and what we do, and to get into, I suppose, the core crux of our tonight's talk in relation to what we need to do. So I suppose to caveat this strongly at this stage, you can see that I do have a cross-border remit within the Geopark, but obviously tonight has got solely a strong and firm Fermanagh focus, but we will of course be given that strong nod to areas in Cavan if and when it's appropriate to do so. Now, the very first, looking at the Lough Erne system, and the very first, I suppose, inclination or notification of it existing was actually in a map that was produced in the 2nd century, where a river Ryovi was present, and that we think is maybe the first historical appearance of the Erne anywhere in the map. A number of centuries later, I thought this was a very fitting starting point, a quote by Sir John Davies, who was the then Attorney General of Queen Elizabeth I in 1609, when he wrote about Fermanagh and Lough Erne in particular. "It is so pleasant and fruitful a country that if I should make a full description thereof, it would rather be taken for a poetical fiction than a true and serious narration. The fresh lake called Lough Erne, being more than 40 miles in length and abounding in freshwater fish of all kinds, and containing 100 different islands, divides that country in 2 parts. The land on either side of the loch is the richest and fattest soil in all of Ulster." I don't know how much of it I think we'd certainly agree with a significant proportion of it. My dad is a farmer. I don't know if he'd agree with the last part, but certainly I think that sets the scene very well for this fantastic and spectacular landscape they're actually going to talk about this evening. And when we talk about landscapes, what we mean there are that they really are the synthesis of both natural and cultural elements. No landscape remains the same due to static forces, due to ongoing forces such as climate change, such as weathering and time. Few actually remain natural due to those human influences. So really, in order to understand and be able to read and unlock the secrets of those landscapes, we've got to look at the natural landscape, the product of the geological, just clearly, as you can see, what geoparks are all about, the climatic, and as well as the biological processes, because the geology obviously influences everything else. And as well as that, the cultural landscape there too, the stories that are contained in the layers of history and the generations of human activity that have taken place across an area. There are a number of ways, I suppose, where we in the Geopark tell and aim to tell those fascinating stories of the Geopark. But tonight, I suppose, the way I'm going to do it is give you a whistle-stop tour, I suppose, of the Erne and some of the hidden landscapes within it. I'm sure that most of you are very, very familiar with the actual Erne and the Erne system itself. So I'll certainly not labour this point too much. You can see sort of main water bodies here, Upper Lough Erne and Lower Lough Erne in there as well. And obviously the river, the Erne system, it rises in Lough Erne in Longford, makes its way to Lough Erne in Cavan. The River Erne then flows towards Belturbet. And then we come into County Fermanagh and Upper Lough Erne, flowing on to Enniskillen, into Lower Lough Erne, and then what's commonly referred to as the Broad Lough, as you could pass Kearney and the Manfin Islands, and then after Roscoe into the river again and out into Ballyshannon and the Atlantic. It is in fact a spectacular system, a river system in there. Significant area, it's 144 metres squared. In some areas it is a maximum depth of up to 65 metres. But more or less an average depth of between 2.5 and 12 metres as you go along. And it is the second biggest, no surprise, the second biggest lace system in Northern Ireland and the fourth in terms of in Ireland. And it has well over 150 islands. So in terms of the geography, that's where it is, that's what it contains. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is an image taken of Lower Lough Erne looking out from the Maho Cliffs at the Loch Navar viewpoint. And equally an aerial image looking down on Upper Lough Erne as well, just to give you a feel and a flavour for the landscape that we're going to be talking about tonight, if you weren't already familiar with it. So how did the loch actually get there? How did the water get there? Well, of course, like everything, there are always good stories that are associated, and I think that's a very fitting place to start. There are a number of different explanations for the River Erne or for the Lough Erne system. I've just highlighted a few. Like most, if any of us are involved in sort of reading in terms of back of past history, sort of Noah's flood and the biblical floods, obviously for many, were the initial starting point. And you can see there in 1631, from the gentleman who originally was involved in writing the Annals of Ulster, then describes the floods as bursting forth into Lough Erne and Lough Neagh. There are other explanations that come in terms of the battle against the Erne, a sect of the Furblogs, and that's that actually took place on the land where the Erne now is, and after the battle, obviously the lake flowing over them. It can also have been said where Irene, the waiting maid of Queen Maid Connacht, was actually drowned in the loch, and that's possibly where the name comes from, or indeed after the daughter of the sea god. But Wakeman in the 19th century said that a spring well, and this is possibly my favourite, that a spring well enclosed by a wall and a locked door, and a lady on hearing a baby cry and actually forgot to close the door, that the water eventually flowed out of the well and eventually reached Ballyshannon, covering everything in its path. So that's how people believe in mythology, how the water bodies actually got there. But I suppose, what does the science say? And maybe some of you hopefully were fortunate enough to listen to our scientific advisor, Dr. Christian Levin, who gave a talk here recently in terms of the geology of the Geopark. And if you did, you will know that the Earth is now about 4.5 billion years old. Such a phenomenal time frame that in order for us to be able to understand, it's broken down into a series of different geological time periods. And what we have in the diagram in front of you are the time periods that are represented within our Geopark. and a geological map of it. Now, don't worry, we're not going to go into too much detail on that, but we do have a history in the Geopark that's over 900 million years old. And where we'll start in terms of explaining where that water has come from in Lough Erne will be on this Quaternary period, or what you may know as the Ice Age, the Big Freeze, which came to an end about 15,000 years ago. And if you take a look at some of the images here in the bottom right, that's indeed what the island of Ireland would have looked like back those many years ago. Fantastic mammals and creatures roaming around. It's like these, you can say the Irish elk or giant deer, you can see there on the left, woolly mammoths. Okay, so get those fantastic images into your head. That's what we're talking about. And if you can imagine that there are ice sheets, in some cases, the length of at least 2 football pitches, I suppose, deep, they're making their way across the landscape of Fermanagh in this particular instance. And in this part of the world, the ice was actually moving in a westerly direction. And as it moves along, it's phenomenal power. It can scour out everything that's in its path and acts like sandpaper. So as it moved in that westerly direction, scouring out everything underneath, it basically created these glacial valleys or voids that were large enough to eventually form the water bodies that we can see in particular there as Lough Erne. And also significantly, in terms of that as well, to mention the Lough Erne system, which is absolutely unique, and you can see here from the islands that you can see in Lough Erne that the ice actually here moved in 2 separate directions, and as in doing so, it actually moulded the ground underneath to create what are known as moraines and rib moraines, and these are part of that international geological heritage that we have here in the Geopark. Simply fantastic, and still, as you say, part of the Erne system. So that's, as we say, I suppose what the science would say behind it. And another evidence, I suppose, for that in terms of the fantastic islands that we've mentioned that you can see on both upper and lower Lough Erne, over 150 in total. And if you've ever taken time, and please do, to take a wee look, and that's why I've tried to put some aerial images in here, to look at the shape of those islands. They have a very distinctive shape, an egg-like shape. They're drumlin islands. Once again, these are relics of the movement of the ice towards the ocean in the westerly direction. And if you look at the map, you'll also see that that is how they are aligned. So once again, a phenomenal relic of our glacial past. Not only that, the many, many islands that we find on both upper and lower Lough Erne, you find a unique myriad of habitats there that you will find very rarely in many other places in Northern Ireland in particular. This massive open water that goes into reed beds, that then goes into wet woodland or open grassland, hugely unique, and it provides a fantastic habitat for a variety of species of animals, and rightly so for that reason. A number of the islands on both the upper and lower Lough, and indeed the areas themselves, have local, national and international designations because of either the habitats or the species indeed that they contain. And just to give you a flavour, an example of some of those, the image of the fish that you can see, apologies, on the left-hand side is what's known as a pollen. Once again, a relic of our glacial past. Not as numerous, indeed, in the Erne system as they once were, but nonetheless, so I'm reliably informed, and maybe some of you through the questions can help with this, but should still be there within the Erne system. This particular plant you can see in the centre is what's known as ivy broom rape, and it's found on one particular island within Lower Lough Erne, a parasitic plant, an extremely rare one that survives in symbiosis with ivy that you find, and just some of the uniqueness, some of the unique diversity you can find here too. And our colleagues, it would be remiss of me not to mention our colleagues in the RSPB who do fantastic work on managing a series of islands within Lower Lough Erne, particularly for breeding waders and breeding birds. So we've got a curlew here in the right, a lapwing and a redshank there, and thanks to their fantastic work, we're still very fortunate to have quite substantial and significant populations of those birds. And alongside the pollen, obviously, you have the trout, you have pike, roach, bream in there, all fantastic for this guy here, the otter, okay, one of the best swimmers that you'll find anywhere in the system. So I suppose if it wasn't, that's where the water certainly comes from. This is what you'll find in it and surrounding it, this wealth of biodiversity that's hugely, hugely unique. But in addition to that, I suppose it would be remiss not to mention then those islands as being sanctuaries for the biodiversity and indeed managed fantastically by people in order to ensure that they remain so. And people have obviously had a significant impact on our landscapes as well. The landscapes of the Geopark and indeed of Lough Erne have presented many opportunities and challenges to people over the years and have contributed to the diversity of settlers that have been able to call the Lough Erne system home. Now, certainly not going to go into this in significant amount of detail, as I know this will be a huge topic of interest to most of you, and there will be plenty more talks coming up in relation to it. But certainly in a Geopark context and indeed in an Erne context, you can find representation of our ancestors throughout all these various different time periods within the system. We're now going back to the Mesolithic period, 10,000 years ago, when the first settlers arrived or present on the island of Ireland and had a very much a nomadic lifestyle. And therefore, you find that they would have originally habited sort of loch shores and areas surrounding water bodies. And what we find are usually tools that they've used and made out of local stone. And one area in which that is the case is here in Loch Macnean, on the shores of Lower Loch Macnean in particular. Obviously, they were quickly followed by the Neolithic, or early farmers, or excuse me, the hunter-gatherers, who had a much more settled way of life and had cleared the upland areas. The footprint that they really left in terms of our landscape in the Erne system and further afield are these huge and fantastic megaliths, these large stone burial sites. And this is actually a picture of Achnaglach court tomb, dual court tomb in Ballintempo Forest. In quick succession after that, I suppose in terms of 4,000 years ago, we entered then obviously into the Bronze Age as well. And no longer, I suppose, did we have these sort of large stone burial sites. We had moved on and become much more extravagant in terms of creating specific types of tombs and burial sites, and wedge tombs, for example. And there's a fantastic example of that in Cavan Park, in one of our Geopark sites in Cavan, for those of you who haven't been able to see one of those. And indeed cairns as well. You can see these dotted across the landscape, indeed of West Fermanagh. And this one is actually on the summit of Culca Mountain. We obviously couldn't talk about the Erne and the Erne system without looking at the early Christian period either, in terms of the late 5th and the early 6th century, when monasteries and churches were set up by St. Patrick and alike. And forgetting that the Erne that you can see in the lower loch here on this in the picture, these would have been the highways and byways of the day, the hustle and bustle of activity. And of course, you would have to mention the significance of Devenish Island in that context, and indeed the High Cross on Inishmixnaint as well. The Anglo-Norman period, then moving into, I suppose, the more later the 12th century, and brought many changes along with it in terms of the creating of borough towns, castles, churches, and still within that system. I'm not sure if most of you maybe recognise the picture, but this is of Clough Castle, an Anglo-Norman castle on Lough Erne, in the middle of that fantastic moraine, riverine moraine system that we mentioned earlier on. And then obviously we have the 17th century and the plantation of Ulster. And we are very fortunate to have a number of fantastic plantation castles dotted along the shores of Lough Erne, from Katora to Tully that you can see in the picture, to Castle Caldwell, to name but a few in there as well. And obviously to the present day, we still continue to have an influence on that particular landscape, and probably one of the most significant being the drainage scheme of the 1800s on the actual Erne system. But you can see in the upland areas, you know, the abandonment of farming and homesteads, and on the lowlands, the changes in farming practices as well. all of which have influenced and shaped the landscapes that surround us and the stories then that they tell. So that's, I suppose, looking at the surface in relation to it, but what's happening underneath? Those hidden worlds that we mentioned as well. Well, if we think back originally when I showed you obviously the various geological time periods that are represented in the Geopark, this is possibly one of my favourite. It's the Carboniferous period. And for this, we're going to cast our minds back, or get you to cast your mind back about 340 million years ago. And what you probably wouldn't have been doing then would have been sitting here listening to me delivering a talk. You may have been swimming around in a fantastic tropical sea. Think somewhere warm, think somewhere like the Great Barrier Reef in Australia in your minds. What you can see in the image there is an artist's impression of what we think that sea would have looked like. Absolutely teeming with life. At that point, we were much closer to the equator at that point in time. And all those creatures, whenever they died, their bones and shells all fall to the bottom of the sea, and over time are cemented with the lime-rich mud on the bottom of the sea to form limestone rock, one of the dominant rock types that you actually find in the Geopark area. And these are some examples of the fantastic limestone or karst landscapes that we have here in the Geopark. Starting in the top left, you have sort of the Knockmore around sort of Bow, Dargonley area, Marlbank, okay, in terms of Culca, the Hanging Rock, not too far away from Gordatoll Outdoor Education Centre, which I hope you're all familiar with, and the fantastic peak of Benauchlan there as well. Okay. Now, as I say, I've mentioned it's possibly my favourite of all the geological time periods, and limestone being the favourite rock for two reasons. Firstly, one, if you look really closely at it, you will be able to see the fossils of those creatures in the rock, the bones and the shells of some of those fantastic animals that lived in those tropical seas 340 million years ago, and the fact that most of them are now actually extinct, it gives you a fascinating insight into the lives of those creatures and how they would have lived back then. That's the first reason. The second reason being that limestone is actually slightly soluble. It dissolves in slightly acidic rainwater. Now, there are naturally occurring cracks in limestone rocks. The vertical cracks going down are called joints, and the horizontal are called bedding planes. So whenever rainwater, which is slightly acidic, hits the limestone rock, it actually makes its way through the natural cracks in the rock, eating away at it or wearing it away, and over time actually being able to open and widen those cracks to create passageways significant enough for us to be able to walk through, and ultimately those are called caves then. And this is obviously demonstrated, hopefully quite well, in this schematic that you can see here on the right-hand side. So caves are very much a unique part of the Fermanagh landscape, and in particular the West Fermanagh landscape. And we know that those caves exist under your feet. But just for your information, there are plenty of features that you can see on the surface that will let you know that you're in a limestone area. I'll talk a wee bit more about these later, but these are dolines. Okay, there are two different types. This is subsidence doline, these lovely bowl-shaped impressions that you find in the landscape, and that's a picture taken from Marlbank, from the Gort McConnell area up there. And limestone pavement. I'm sure on your head you can all think of those spectacular images of the Burren and the limestone pavement you find there, but they don't have the monopoly on it, because we certainly have some fantastic parcels of pavement in southwest Fermanagh and in that Culca area as well. And as we mentioned, obviously Culca, this is where we're going to start on the journey, I suppose, as well, and looking at that hidden exploration of the world. We mentioned this picture earlier on, but there are three rivers that have their source on Culca Mountain. And as we mentioned, the upper reaches of Culca are actually made of sandstone. The lower reaches are made of limestone. Sandstone is slightly more impermeable, which means that the water can actually flow across it, and it will continue to do so on the surface until it hits an area of limestone. And when it does, as you know, it will be able to eat and wear away at it, creating some spectacular areas and pieces in our landscape, features in our landscape known as sinks or swallow holes. This is Monaster Gorge, where one of those particular rivers, the Ahanran River on Culca Mountain, actually sinks underground and makes its way into the Marble Arch Caves. Now, this spectacular underground world is one of the areas we're going to look at tonight. And as I've mentioned, you need to get the Marble Arch Caves on your to-do list. But the Marble Arch Caves, the show cave element, is a 1.5 kilometre section of a much wider 11.5 kilometre underground cave system. And initially, a number of explorers up until the present day have been brave enough, maybe silly enough or brave enough, to continue the exploration of that system. But one of the first was this gentleman here. He's known as Edward Alfred Martell, and in 1895 was invited to survey a number of the caves that we're actually going to talk about now by the 4th Earl of Enniskillen, who then lived in Florence Court and thankfully had a very keen interest from our perspective in geology. So he would have come in 1895, as you can see here. This isn't an image from the Marble Arch system. It's a cave in Yorkshire, but dressed in his tweeds, carrying his hemp rope. And he's quite fortunate, he's a Frenchman, to be able to have had some of his equipment shipped from France to enable him to undertake the journey and the exploration of the Marble Arch cave system. But a world of difference between what our modern day cavers use in terms of the sort of the high fibre ropes, the helmets, the LED lights, Wellingtons. It must look so phenomenal to someone like Edward Martell, who was able to see how the sport and the science indeed of caving and speleology has continued on today. And this is an image in what he would have found and explored inside the Marble Arch cave system. Now, I'm obviously not going to show you too much because the idea is that you get yourselves there whenever the caves are in a position to open again. But this is just gives you a spectacular feel of what that underground system actually looks like. These fantastic formations that you can see here hanging down from the cave roof, from below, coming up from the cave floor. This is one that's called a stalactite, and that's actually the largest stalactite in the caves and has been very fittingly named after Edward Martell himself. Some of the other features that you're likely to find in these underground adventures, I suppose what I should say is that all these features are actually made from a substance known as calcite. So as those drops of rainwater make their way through the limestone rocks, they pick up small pieces of that substance called calcite. And with every drip of water that falls into the cave system, a little piece of the calcite remains behind. And these take thousands of years in order to build. Possibly some of the fastest growing formations in that cave take over 1 centimetre every 100 years. It's roughly 1 centimetre every 1,000 years. So you are looking at a history, a natural history resource here that dates back, we think, at least 1 million years old, if not more. So for your next cave adventure, so you can all identify these features, that's a stalactite coming down from the roof, stalagmite, cave pillar or column where the two join, a flowstone, and a cave curtain coming down from the roof of the cave. You see spectacular examples of these in the Marble Arch system, but they're not. You can also find them in others as well. This is just a larger flowstone here, one of the more iconic formations in the cave, and I see another formation known as rimstone pools, or features, apologies, known as rimstone pools that you find on these spectacular flowstones. And I'm sure at this point you're asking yourself, is there anything that can potentially live underground in where it's dark for the vast majority of the year, and in a cave like Marble Arch where you nearly have 100% humidity in there? There aren't many that can tolerate that, and certainly not in particular all year round, but bats are particularly commonplace. Potentially not roosting within that cave system itself, but you will find them, numbers of pipistrelles and dulbentins bats in particular. This is a picture of a trout, and a brown trout, and you may wonder why I've put that there, but in my many years working in the caves, I've been fortunate enough to see albino trout, white, that they've been blocked inside the cave system for so long that they actually lose their pigment and colour, and where they really should be is in the Claddagh River as it flows out of the Marble Arch system. Okay, so the start, but as I say, not the only cave. For ourselves, maybe, if we're not keen to get done, the boots and the caving suits and the helmets, it's certainly a fantastic way to explore part of these hidden underground worlds. Other areas that you can visit and look at would be here in terms of Golem Cave in Belmore Forest in Bow. This is just the entrance to that particular cave system. It's actually originally a collapsed cave. You can just about see at the top where the roof of the cave would have once been, and that over time has actually collapsed into the spectacular waterfall at the entrance. There is a viewing platform where you can look down into the cave system, and this drawing here on the right, I think we have to credit the chair of the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership for that particular one, that gives you a feel for this particular cave system and what you would experience as you walk inside, which would look something like this. So a wide open passageway. And in Victorian times, this site actually would have been used as a show cave. So probably way ahead of us in terms of the concept now of sustainable tourism, shall we say, or indeed ecotourism. And this is a fantastic place with experienced guides, I should say, in order to explore and learn more about these underground worlds. And this is what we do in terms of part of our role as the Geopark. We've actually hosted 4 members of the local community trips underground with qualified cave leaders with all the kit, so they get to experience these underground systems. Now, I happen to be from relatively within that local area, and I know certainly that my father's very familiar with these systems, having hidden there rather than attend school in the local school on many's a day, and I'm sure he wasn't alone in there either. But it's fantastic to be able to bring these underground worlds to life. Neighbouring to that is an area known as Bow Caves. We've mentioned there Golem or Cullarkin Cave, because that can also be known as that's the townland that it's in. But in very close proximity to that, you find what's known as Bow Caves. And Bow Caves are actually, so I'm told, one of the most complex cave systems in Ireland, because they are a joint controlled cave. There's only about 1.5, I believe, kilometres of explored passageway within the cave. But as you can see here through the image on the left, what makes them complex is the nature is that they're actually nearly mirror images of each other in terms of the passageways there. So it's you have to be extremely advanced caver in order to navigate those. And the image on the right, you can see they're still adorned with some fantastic formations or speleotherms in there as well. And you can just about see some of the rimstone pools on the corner of the flowstone there too. Interestingly, should you ever want to visit that particular area, and rather than go into the underground system, the local pub actually has part of the facility, shall we say, within the actual cave system, and this cellar for the pub is actually within Bow Caves itself in relation to that. So that's a unique one that certainly you'll not find in too many places. But as we mentioned, the whole Bow, Knockmore, Dargonley area is abundant with limestone and karst. And some of these other underground worlds that you may be familiar with is what's known as Noon's Hole. I don't know if anybody has come across that. It is in essence a pothole, one of the deepest potholes in Ireland. You can see there it's got a vertical shaft of about 250 feet. And that's compared to the diagram, and there we can see where City Hall in Belfast is only 173 feet within there. It so gets its name from a gentleman that was known as Dominic Noon, who was a ribman, but also was an informer back in 1826. And strangely, it's noted on a number of occasions about him having a very strange appearance and yellow hair with ringlets right down to his waist, which made me think that was all quite timely, as you'd probably be able to see plenty of grey hairs and lots of ringlets in mine as a result of COVID and lockdown. But unfortunately, Dominic met a very untimely death when he was lured by some of his colleagues and basically thrown down Noon's Hole in 1826. So that is where it gets its name from. And these are some very brave souls making their way down Noon's Hole. And the image on the left here is from a caving club in Yorkshire, who were actually one of the first back in the early 1920s in order to make the descent down the full entire shaft of Noon's Hole. I suppose what we do in terms of the Geopark is that there's always constant research, constant exploration going on of these underground worlds. Unfortunately, just not in a position to be able to show it to you tonight because obviously the bandwidth just won't take it in terms of the internet. But I would really welcome you to go on to a recent event that we have delivered in partnership with some fantastic local hydrogeologists who live in the area, John Kelly and Les Brown, who have put together a fantastic video. It's about 40 minutes long of exploring the Shannon Erne system and these underground worlds in the Erne landscape and what they look like. So all the details are there, and I really would welcome you to go onto the website and take a look at that. It does make for fascinating stuff. And the reason that I mention that is because the mystery still continues. Although we know, and I'm only giving you a flavour of what we know in relation to these fantastic hidden underground worlds, we are always still learning. We are always still exploring in relation to the landscapes. And two that I'd just like to point out here would be the Holy Well in Belcoo, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And obviously Holy Well was the name of the village prior to the arrival of the railway in the 19th century. But the St. Patrick's well there in the Belcoo, and strangely, we still have no idea definitively where the water from the well actually comes from. It's suspected that it comes from Ballintempo, Uplands, and in Rayfad in the Tullybrack system, but it's impossible to confirm at this stage. And places like the Shannon Pot in Cavan, where there's still, we think we know that in East Culca is initially the rising of the Shannon Pot. That comes as quite a hard blow to some of my colleagues in Cavan to find out that the rising of the mighty River Shannon is actually in Fermanagh rather than Cavan. But that is, of course, the scientific fact behind it, but there's still parts of that system that are being actively explored, and we're working with our colleagues there, Les and John, in terms of facilitating that. So the mystery and the exploration certainly will still continue. I suppose those were the hidden underground worlds and the gems in our site, but very briefly, just to talk about some of the hidden worlds that are actually right under our noses and right in plain sight, and no more so than the fantastic limestone peak of Benoclan. And if any of you are in sort of that sort of Marlbank, Derrylin, Timor area, you can't but miss the spectacular peak. What you can see in the background in the distance, just to place it for those who don't know, that's Slieve Rushen and the wooden turbines of what were formerly the Crim Group on the mountain there. This is sort of the Florence Court, the lowlands of Florence Court here, and behind us you would have, the rising up to Culca Mountain. So Benoclan, you can see, translates from the Irish into the peak of the speaking horse. It was actually said at one point that it was a white painted horse on the northern side of the particular mountain there. And the reason being that on Bilberry Sunday, which was the last Sunday in July, that beings from the mountain would actually make their way out. And should you have not had all your doors and windows locked, certainly children in particular and young people would have been taken back into the mountain and kept there in Benoclan. So fantastic landscape with an abundant natural history and fantastic stories to tell in terms of the mythology there too. Another of my personal favourites, and as I say, hiding in plain sight. And as I mentioned, we work with colleagues in the Forest Service, so we're slap bang here in the middle of the largest block of continuous forestry anywhere in Northern Ireland. And you're looking at these two mounds that are known as Little Dog and Big Dog. There's actually a Geopark walk, and you can get access right the way to the top of Little Dog. So for those of you that live within 10 miles, I would certainly recommend at the present moment that you go and visit that fabulous place. Now, the mounds themselves are actually made of sandstone, that more harder resistant rock, and the remainder limestone there. But some fantastic stories in relation to how these rocks originally got there. And this is as a result of none other than our friend Finn McCoo, who obviously was only ever a step away from the Giant's Causeway. So what it was said was that as Finn's two famous wolfhounds, Bran and Joan, were out, one day they caught the scent of a witch and began to give chase. The witch actually turned herself into a deer in the hope that she could outchase them. But regrettably, they began to gain on her. And in doing so, she returned to her last resort and turned both of them into stone. Hence the reason why they're called Little Dog and Big Dog. As I say, well worth a visit. And certainly this is the view from Little Dog, looking out onto that fantastic landscape below. And equally the loch, you can see here on the right, the reason that I've mentioned that's Lough Erne, or Yellow Loch, as some of the people locally may know it. But in that loch, deep within, we do believe are some Arctic char. Once again, a fish, a remnant of that glacial past. And also that's some really important glacial sediments on the floor of that particular lake. And particularly now in times with climate change and needing our past, needing to help us in terms of understanding, mitigating and adaptation to climate change in the future, a hugely important place. And you'll also see damselflies, dragonflies skirting around the waters of Lough Erne, as you can tell, maybe one of my favourite places. And they too are obviously relics of our glacial past in there. So just some of the hidden, but more in plain sight stories from some of the Geopark areas. And I suppose a little bit of self-indulgence here in terms of Castle Caldwell Forest on the outskirts of the lake, a fantastic place. If you ever get an opportunity, please go and visit that, and a fantastic Geopark site in relation to it. Spectacular woodland, as you can see here, deciduous, a mix of deciduous and coniferous woodland, and the fantastic colours of autumn that you can see, but equally the beech trees and the bluebells underneath in spring. You look out onto Maho and Loch Navarre and that spectacular area and huge bodies of water there. And our colleagues, once again, the RSPB, have worked tirelessly over the years in terms of managing the land and the water around it to make sure that it is the perfect habitat and home for a spectacular array of bird life. But equally, you will be able to find some very rare species of moths in there in particular, and also some of the trees, like I'm showing you here as well, the Guelder Rose, an absolutely fabulous place. But one where you can't separate the natural from the cultural or the built in order to be able to tell the story. And you may mention in the start that it is one of the plantation castles. Regrettably, there's very little of it. You can now see the picture here in the left. There's actually a green sort of fence now that encloses the castle itself because it's simply just not stable enough in order to be viewed. But nonetheless, absolutely well worth visiting. And the castle itself was actually originally purchased by James Caldwell in 1662. Obviously, the castle was there previous to that. And over time, it was obviously then transferred and passed to a descendant of his, John Caldwell Bloomfield. And that was at a time when fortunes had obviously downturned in the economy, and he actually owned that entire estate and the water right the way to Bleak village. He was also, thankfully for us, a very keen geologist as well, so had ordered a survey of the lands in his ownership, and what he found was feldspar and kaolin, two minerals that are absolutely necessary in the manufacture of clay. And what you see here in the bottom right-hand corner is actually one of the best and nearly, I think, only examples of nearly an industrial lime kiln or industrial kiln you find anywhere in the Geopark. And this is where it would have been fired in order to make some of the raw materials that were necessary for the establishment of Bleak pottery, which he did, and was ferried across then back to the mainland by boat and on a jetty. And he himself and others, there's all sorts of stories in relation to Castle Caldwell. And here is the Fiddler stone, the very iconic Fiddler stone that you find on the way in there as well, because the Caldwells and Caldwell Bloomfields were very much firmly strong into their music and musicians. So this is a tribute, I think, to when like the rest of us, maybe we come out of lockdown and we have the ability to have parties again. Hopefully we don't get as raucous as per Dennis McCabe, who actually drank a little bit too much and fell off his boat into the Erne and regrettably was never seen again. So we'll certainly try and avoid that, but an absolutely spectacular place that is steeped in natural, cultural and built history in there. Absolutely one of my favourites, and I certainly couldn't go on this evening without letting you know a little bit more about that. But I think it's time to draw us to a close, and I hope you've enjoyed what has there been a whistle-stop tour of some of the hidden landscapes in Lough Erne, and indeed some of those that are maybe not so hidden and in plain sight as well. And when I was doing some research for the particular talk, I came across this passage from a book that was produced by Mary Rogers. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's absolutely fantastic reading, and I really thought it was very timely and a very fitting end to the presentation. And what she says was, Fermanagh people themselves seem more interested in their own county. Many are exploring their heritage in the fields, mountains and lakes for the first time. This sometimes seem to be looking at themselves in the process. Fermanagh people resist sameness. And that was written back in the early 1980s, and it really resonated with me, I think, just in terms of where we find ourselves now in the middle of this global pandemic, and how fortunate we absolutely are to live. I am certainly to live and work and play in a fantastic county like Fermanagh. So a very fitting, hopefully, end to the presentation. So there we are. That was it. Hopefully you find that informative, enjoyable, and if not, give you a little bit of escapism to another world if you aren't from the area. So more than delighted to take any questions now that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Martina. That's very enjoyable, as I fully expected. One thing I would take from your final quote, Fermanagh people resist sameness. I think all our speakers have been excellent and have talked on a wide range of subjects. Martina has been no exception and certainly knows the subject very well, and obviously knows her own county quite thoroughly as well, no doubt about that. So anyway, questions now. So Heather is probably going to field some of the written questions and pass them on to Martina. Is that all right, Heather? Have we got any questions yet? Maybe not.
I can do that for you, Richard.
Well, Marie, okay, sorry, yes.
Sorry, we are getting lots of comments in here at the minute, so my screen just keeps flipping down all the time. I wonder whether it might be useful. I see that we have somebody here who joined, and their joining ID is 000399. Now, I have a suspicion that that might be Mr. Jim Letwith himself, and he made some comments here, which I wonder whether he would like to expand on.
Like what, Anne-Marie?
You talked about, hang on, all my screen just keeps flipping up and down, so I've just lost it here. You asked a question around where is the status of the review into the geographical expansion of the Geopark? That as a question, I suppose, Martina, as a start, please.
Yes, certainly. Hello, Jim. How are you? I hope you're keeping well. And thank you very much for the very valid contributions that you made to that particular process, Jim. So where we're at the moment is in terms of the review of the boundary, I think is what you're talking about in particular. And that has been discussed and debated at our most recent Geopark committee meeting. So as a result of that, hopefully in the coming weeks, certainly that we have a more definitive way forward in terms of the absolute boundary as a result of that, but operationally still operating within sort of the West Fermanagh and West Cavan area. So I hope that answers your question, Jim.
That's great, thank you, Martina. Jim, the comment which you made before talked about, I interviewed miners who mined gypsum at Malik. Can you tell us a bit more about that? You're just on mute there, Jim.
Sorry, am I okay now?
Yeah.
Some 20, 25 years ago, I interviewed miners from the Moulded area outside Lake, and I'm wrong. It was Valspar, I think, that they had mined, and you could see the entrance into the mine and the tracks, the metal tracks that the horses, the mini horses, pulled out the crates of Velspar from that mine. And I was absolutely surprised to even interview old men that had been down the mine, and secondly that the tracks of the gauge were still there on the ground to be seen. So it was something it was part of the social history of the area. I was absolutely surprised to learn about, and there was very little mention about it in books. But for those men, it was pure hardship. It was a wage.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jim.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Jim. I might actually even pick up with you on that, Jim, because that's a really, really fascinating story. If you don't mind, that'd be great. Learn more about it, Jim.
I think it was featured in the Impartial Reporter some years back, way back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great. No, thanks very much, Jim.
Question here for you, Martina. When do you expect the Marble Arch Cave system to reopen to the public?
Yeah, I'm sure our colleagues in the Marble Arch Caves are equally as keen to open as soon as they can, and it is as soon as government guidelines permit. At the moment, regrettably, they're just not in the position to do that. But I'm certainly sure that they are eager, keen, and busy working behind the scenes to be very much prepared and to be open and welcome visitors from all walks and shapes of life as soon as they can do so.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. I see Toppet Mountain falls within the Geopark and wonder what plans are there to develop this part of the county?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, at the moment, we obviously work in partnership with other colleagues within the council, particularly the Countryside Recreation Officer, who primarily has a focus on management on Toppet Mountain. But as we say, once we get sort of the official way forward in terms of the boundary and the review, then we'll certainly be looking at all sites and all areas within the Geopark and moving out in terms of the 6 pillars within our new development plan across the entire area, with hopefully new projects and new initiatives as well.
I would say to you, Martina, that adjacent to Toppet Mountain, you have the council-owned site of Mount Drum.
Yeah.
It boasts one of Ireland's very, very few examples of a triple
Concentric
circle.
Yeah.
That is the particular reason why the council, when I was involved, got funds from the Heritage Lottery Funds to acquire that site from being destroyed.
That's right. I remember that, Jim, and because obviously in my previous role as the environment officer and responsibility for managing that site, I actually remember reading those sort of lots of pieces of paper with your name on the bottom of them, Jim, in that regard. And yes, an absolutely fabulous place that is an asset and is a resource within the ownership of the council. So certainly, as I say, food for thought for future, absolutely, if not in a Geopark context, but certainly with some of our other colleagues in the various departments in the council to look at that.
Okay.
Thank you, Martina. Any plans to have dedicated cycle routes in the area?
Absolutely. There are a number of cycle routes already in place, and you will find details of those on the Geopark website. So it's marblearchcavesgeopark.com. At the moment, for example, my colleagues are working on a long distance cycle trail that will take you from the village of Belcoo right the way through that continuous block of forestry to Lough Erne Forest. So that's ongoing at the moment, and certainly in the future, we're looking at what other sort of cycleways, walkways, and other access infrastructure that we can certainly provide in the Geopark to provide safe and sustainable access to the countryside, so people can get out and explore and visit some of the fantastic locations that we've spoken about tonight.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martina. We will also share with everybody the Geopark website after the event tonight, just to make sure that people have access to that. As locals, we've noticed the lower lake level changing dramatically with the weather. hardly a natural situation. Does this concern you?
I'm just reading through the image. Okay, no, it's the lake lower lake levels changing dramatically with the weather. Hardly a natural situation. Does this concern you? It may well be a natural situation. It may not. Being absolutely honest, I certainly wouldn't know enough about sort of the navigation and the waterways on the Erne to make definitive comment on that particular one. But certainly, if maybe alluding to the fact in relation to climate change and the impacts that certainly could have on our landscape, then absolutely, that is an issue, I think, and should be an issue for us all, to look at what initiatives, what we can change in terms of our own daily lives, and certainly for us in a geopark context, how we can sort of show leadership in terms of working towards sustainability and carbon neutrality and mitigating and adapting the effects of climate change as we move forward. And this is where it's going to be hugely advantageous to us to be part of that wider global network. But this is not a phenomenon that just specifically impacts us in our own local area. So we'd be very privileged to be able to work with others to gain access to information and knowledge that hopefully will help us in the future, in the years to come, in the battle against ongoing climate change. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Martina. So just to note, Heather has posted the Marble Arch Caves website in the chat box there for those of you who want to access that. There is a question there from Marion Maxwell. Now, I don't know, Richard could probably answer some of that, and Martina as well. I know Marion previously spoke to me as well about whether there's any plans to regulate the use of jet skis on Lough Erne, because specific areas, you know, are very, very popular for people using that as part of their summer water sports. So, Richard and Martina, do you have any sort of update or feedback on that?
Certainly, once again, I'll be absolutely honest, not something that I would know definitively significantly enough about to be able to give, you know, a very accurate answer to that one. Certainly, I'm aware that it is an issue that has been highlighted by many stakeholders. Certainly, if that is the case, there'll be a number of colleagues within the council who would be actively engaged with the various government departments in relation to potentially looking at solutions. And I know there are a number of solutions that have been suggested over the years. Can certainly find out more about that and revert back. But Richard, happy to defer to you if you know anything further in terms of that. You're on mute, I think, Richard. Just
there are codes of practice for all lake users, really, no matter what you're doing, whether you're a wildfowler or an angler or a jet skier. And there are regulations on the lake as well now. The problem with that is it's such a huge lake system. It's very difficult for the statutory authorities to have full enforcement at all times right across all the lake, and in fact it's impossible. So really, I suppose we're relying largely on the goodwill and common sense of the users themselves. And if people aren't prepared to exercise that goodwill and common courtesy, we all have a role to play in that. So I mean, if somebody sees somebody doing something stupid on the lake, no matter what they're doing, there's no reason why you can't take their car number. If you can see who these people are, there's no reason why you can't take the car number and just refer that to the statutory authorities who are responsible for it, and hopefully they'll take action. But it's part of our social makeup, and people have to step up and take responsibility for their own actions largely.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think as part of the landscape partnership, we probably also have a role, you know, together with other agencies, looking at, you know, creating some awareness of how people use the loch. So we will certainly also build that into the community engagement activities that we do. Another question here for you, Martina. What is the official position of the Geopark concerning fracking exploration in the park, since there is still a pending license to frack?
Yeah, and I think, I suppose on that being, I think a similar question was asked of my colleague Kirsten Levin in a role as a scientific advisor on the Geopark. Obviously being co-managed by Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and Cavan County Council, and myself as a direct employee of the council, therefore then the stance of our elected representatives in this instance would certainly mirror that in terms of sort of from my sort of personal perspective in relation to that. So it would be identical to that in terms of the council, in terms of that stance in relation to fracking.
That's great. Thank you, Martina. Richard, I don't have any further questions here on the chat box.
Okay. Well, sorry.
Richard, might I ask a question on the navigation side of things?
Certainly, yeah.
Name's Michael Clark, and I'm involved in the yacht club. And Martina, you're looking well. I remember you from some years ago in the amateur radio context.
That's right. I hope you're keeping well too, Michael.
Yes. Now, I make my point this way. County Fermanagh is the capes and bays and islands and coastlines of Lough Erne. And the Lough Erne partnership, your description of the lands around Lough Erne, it was magnificent this evening. It really was. Very interesting and very detailed, and brought out lots of very interesting points. But there's a complete lack of attention to the major thing, which is those two lochs, which have been used for human navigation for several thousand years. On those lochs, that's how the Maguires built Fermanagh, because they had boats and they could control that area, which was the coastlines, etc. That's why Fermanagh is what it is. The Maguires were the first people to use boats for sporting and pleasure at their castle in Enniskillen 600 years ago. And those two lakes also host today the oldest yacht racing sport club in Ireland and possibly in the British Isles. It depends what you count as being a club, with a continuous history of sport on Lough Erne and recreation. And there's a huge amount that's very interesting about that. We are caught up, and there was a couple of comments about the floods. One of the most telling statistics in what you said was that the height above sea level of upper Lough Erne was merely 1 metre more than lower Lough Erne. It is absolutely no wonder that the slightest obstruction of the interlock channel prevents the upper loch from emptying. The head of water that would make it flow down into the lower lake is 1 metre, 3 feet. If you look at an ordinary domestic house, the water tank in the loft in a bungalow is 3 times that height above the sink in the kitchen to get a flow of water out of the tap, etc. So what I'm broadly saying is that I think I'm suggesting that the Lough Erne Partnership take a look at all the aspects of Lough Erne that are navigational and water and sport, sailing, etc., etc. Thanks very much. Sorry to go on so long, but I'm a bit of an addict for that sort of thing.
Your passion for that is well known, Michael, and you made some good points there. We are in consultation. This is the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership. We are in consultation with various statutory agencies and a wide range of voluntary and community bodies associated with the lake. So there's a lot of discussion points come up, and you know, we'll bear in mind what you've said, and some of those issues are being talked about. We're not the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership, of course, isn't a statutory body and has no powers or authority to change systems, but we can be a talking shop for some issues. So yeah, so we'll keep in touch with you on that one, and I'm glad to hear you here, and good to hear your voice again. I haven't met you for a while, but
Yes.
always good to hear from you.
Yeah. Can I add one little point
Certainly,
about the unfortunate fiddlestone stuck
Mhm.
in the damp and moss at the gate of Castle Caldwell? Horace Fleming, who spent years agitating about that fiddlestone, when he talked about it and when he took photographs of it 30 years ago and more, you could read what's on it. Go along to the gate of Castle Caldwell and you'll do a lot of scraping before you get any sight of the words on it. It should be put back where it belongs, right out at the southeastern corner of the Castle Caldwell Peninsula. That's where it was put in the first place, looking out over the lake and with the good fresh air, keeping the moss off it. Right.
That's a very, very valid point, Michael, and certainly just to make yourself and the group aware, you know, that through the auspices of the Geopark, we're now establishing a sort of a stakeholder group in relation specifically to Castle Caldwell to look at overall site development and management. So certainly, Michael, that's a very valid point there, well made. So I'll make sure that that is certainly filtered back into that particular group so that they are aware. And it certainly can be discussed at length. So thank you, Michael, for that.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, so it's time's marching on here, so I think we'll maybe draw the question session to a close. Thank you for everybody for tuning in, if tuning in is the right word for online, but anyway, thank you everybody for watching the presentation tonight, and I'm sure you'll all agree that Martina did an excellent job. So thank you again, Martina, much appreciated. Elmarie has just to make a couple of announcements about future events. So I'll hand you back to Marie, and it's good night from me, as they say.
Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate that. So just before we all go to tonight, and also just a very big thank you from me, Martina, very engaging presentation, lots to learn for everybody there. So thank you for your time, really appreciate it. So just 2 future dates for your diary then, because we aim to continue with our theme of exploring the Lough Erne landscapes. So our next event is on Tuesday, the 23rd of March, again at 7:30. And we will be exploring then the woodlands of Lough Erne. We'll have a guest speaker of Ian Owen, who's a member of the senior leadership team within the Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. So Ian's going to take us through the history of the Fermanagh woodlands over the last 100 years and what the future will hold for this integral part of the rich landscape of Lough Erne. So that's certainly going to be another fascinating talk. So the date there is the 23rd of March. And then the event in April is going to be presented by none other than the very famous Richard Watson, the chair of the partnership. And Richard will talk to us about the Lough Erne landscape through a lens. Now, for those of you who know Richard, you'll know that he has the ability to take some really fantastic photographs. So Richard will take us on a journey of the unique Lough Erne landscapes through his photographs of the region, and then he would be sharing some very unique details of the things that surround us. So those are the 2 dates for your diary. Keep an eye on our website, and we will be sending out some details for how to book on those. But thank you so much for everybody for your time this evening. The recording will be available on our website as well. So if you didn't manage to get everything tonight, then feel free to just watch it back. But thank you so much, everybody, and a very good night from me.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Brilliant, Martina. Elmarie, the second date there, what was it?
Sorry, Siobhan, the 27th of April.
Brilliant.
Again at 7:30.
Okay, thanks a million and really well done. That was class. Gurmagov.
Thank you. Thanks very much, folks. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Richard, Heather, and Hazel. I'll speak to you soon.
Martina, thanks a lot. Cheers for that now, and
No problem.
I'll let you get away for it. Back to your house for the evening.
That's it.
Thanks. Bye.